I'd like to call all the kids up. And I want to call the kids. You can decide if you're a kid or not. If somebody next to you touches you on the shoulder, you're probably a kid. Definitely a kid. I'll give you a visual. This is what a kid looks like. Kids, come up and find a place here. And you can be here. Let's just be very, very careful and cognizant of the fact that we are guests in someone else's sanctuary. So let's be careful. I was expecting 3 kids. 4. Okay. When we get to 100, we stop. No, we'll go to 200. Come forward. Find a place up here, around here, down here, on there. There's a rope that hangs down. We can make a swing out of it. Let's sit on the floor. Wow, I've never felt pressure like this. So come and sit. And now that you're all here, I have to make this very long to justify everybody being up here. You guys can sit right here. And what I want to ask you guys, first of all, is a question. And what I want to ask you in your answers, because there's a certain responsibility that I take very seriously, and I want you to take it seriously, is that when you lead, and whenever you have a microphone in front of you, that means you're leading, that you're respectful of the time, the holiness of the day, the place, the holiness of the place, and the people. So if I ask you a question, just bear that in mind. And the question I want to ask you is, what is Rosh Hashanah to you? And I don't mean what does it mean to them, or what does it mean to me as a rabbi, but what do you think it means for you? Anybody have an idea? What do you guys think? Why are we here? Okay, I'm going to bring the mic to you. 1 second. Zach, on the way, I'm going to catch you and hear your answer.
I think Rosh Hashanah is about honoring the people who protect us and to honor God for his gifts of nature and humanity to us all.
Okay. I think my work is done. It's called early retirement. Zach, that was really beautiful. You know what profound means? It means it gets people thinking. It's not just words that we hear once, but we hear them over and over again. People will be thinking about what you're saying. So I'm going to carefully bring a mic to you. Excuse me, sweetheart. What do you think Rosh Hashanah means to you?
I think Rosh Hashanah is about the beginning of the new year and just throwing away all the sins and starting them over.
Beautiful. Okay. Great answers. Great answers. So now what I want to do, you want to add something as well? What do you want to say? Is it you or the puppy dog that wants to give the answer? You can both give an answer.
Well, you... it's a bug.
That happens to me too.
I think it's about getting... remembering about the past and beginning a new year and trying to be better.
Okay. If all that anybody hears in this whole holiday is what 4 of you said, they'll have had an amazing and moving and thought-provoking Rosh Hashanah. So think about what you just added. So do you remember in years past, how many of you have made story stew with me before? And story stew is where I ask you guys for ingredients, and you guys give me ingredients, and if I can work with them, I try and fit them into a little story for the holiday. So give me an ingredient. Think about the holiday before you throw in, I don't know, a dragon, let's say. But you can put a dragon in. Who has something or someone they want to put into the story? Apples. We can work with apples. Anything else? Honey. Okay, very good start. And? Matzo ball soup. I think we're going to work with matzo ball soup. They can't all be ingredients. Remember, the stew has to be a story, so it's not just about food. Bananas. I like bananas. Let's go away from food. Let's think about ideas that you would want in a story.
Love.
Love. Love and bananas. We already have a good story. Excuse me 1 second.
An angry chef who hates everything.
An angry chef. Let's do therapy here on this one. An angry chef who does what?
Well, I figured everyone else said food, so I figured chef.
And what does he do?
He's a food critic and he makes all the food. Yeah. And he hates everything and whenever he tries something that he makes, they're like, oh, disgusting.
Okay. I think he just gave me a great hook for a great story. So let's begin. There was a man called Guido. And Guido wasn't a chef, but he knew a chef. Guido had a brother who ran the most fantastic restaurant in the town of Chchchch. And in Chchchch, there was one great restaurant where people would come from all over the land. People would come with horses and carriages. And those who couldn't afford horses and carriages, if they could eat one fine meal in 1 year, they would walk, they would trek, they would make a pilgrimage to the town, the mountaintop town of Chchchch to eat at this restaurant. So imagine, by the way, what the signs looked like on the way to the town. Chchchch, 8 miles. Chchchch, 12 miles. Difficult to spell. It's like places in Wales. So what happened this time of the year was that Guido had this friend, and his friend was called Bradley. In the town of Chchchch, there was Guido and there was Bradley. And Bradley was a world-renowned chef. And everybody knew, because the food critics would tell them, that this restaurant was the finest cuisine that they could find. Now, there were Jewish people in the town just below Chchchch, which was called Rrrrrrrr. Now, it's hard to know. People would meet each other based on looks and accents. They would know if the person came from Chchchch or Rrrrrrr. So there were a lot of exchanges on the road. As people were making the pilgrimage, they would say, where are you from? And the person would speak, and they go, oh, you're Rrrrrrr. Okay, they understood. So let me tell you what happened one day. Good stories always have one day in them. Once upon a time, one day. So one day, the Jewish people from Rrrrrrr went up the hill because it was coming to Rosh Hashanah, the new year. And they said, let's start the year right. If we can't cook in our own kitchens, which they couldn't, let's go to the finest restaurant in Chchchch, the finest restaurant in the entire land, and eat the finest food. We know that they'll have apples and honey. We know they'll have bananas. Let's go up to that restaurant. Let's have the finest cuisine that our little money can buy. So that day, they walked up the hill. Some had carriages, some had horses, some just had their feet and swollen feet at that because of the distance, the difficulty of the walk. They made it to the greatest restaurant in the land. And everybody sat down. They said a bracha, a blessing over the meal before they ate. And then something terrible happened. They tasted the matzo ball soup, and they were like rocks. They tasted the soup, and it was so salty, and people said, what happened? This was the greatest restaurant in the land. We just spent our hard-earned money, all we had, on the finest chef in the finest restaurant, the promise of the greatest meal. And nobody knew the reason why the food had changed that year, so they came back every year hoping the food would get better. But they didn't know that the chef had left one ingredient out of his food. For years and years, he started to look at what he didn't have in his life instead of what he did have. Every day when he went to the kitchen, he saw what was missing on the shelves instead of what there was. He'd open the big fridge and he'd see what was missing on empty shelves instead of seeing what there was. He'd go home to his family and he'd see what was missing instead of realizing and recognizing what was. And what he decided to do was to just cook food with ingredients that he poured in with his hands, that he chopped and cut and threw into bowls and made soups and made stews and made food. But what was missing was the most important ingredient of the new year and of your lives and any food that you've ever been fed by your parents or a restaurant of their choosing. It was love. It was love. And he started to hear the food critics complaining that his food had changed all over the land and the world, even on the internet in those days. It was birds. It was pigeons. It was like internet. The word got around that the finest restaurant in Chchchch was no longer serving good food. And it came back to the angry, disheartened chef. And one day his wife said to him, why do you look so disheartened? Why don't you love what you loved all your life, which was cooking for other people? And it was that day that something shifted in him. It was the beginning of a new year, and he went back to his kitchen, and he opened the larder, and he saw what was, not what wasn't. And he opened the great doors of the great refrigerator, and he saw what ingredients he had to be creative with, not what was missing. And he saw people around him, and he realized how fortunate he was to have people, good people working with him, coming into the restaurants. And that day, on that Rosh Hashanah, when people dipped apples in honey, when people said motzi over a challah, when people ate soup, they ate the finest soup and the finest food in the world. And all that had been missing for those passing years was a simple ingredient that you and I have to give, to pepper on everything we do, which is love. So thank you for the ingredients.